overnight. I was devastated, man. I was angry. I just didn't understand it. There were a lot of emotions that I felt, and I voiced them a lot to my wife. I think she was tired of hearing about my take on the Pac-12 disintegrating overnight.
Same.
Yeah. But then, you fast forward to just last week, and my emotions on the other side of the pendulum were just jubilance, joy.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, of course, joined by Jim Thornby, and we got a lot to talk about. Week 3, complete review of that. We've got our go players, coaches of the week, those awards. We'll get to those very shortly. We got recaps from every conference. And today's guest, Mike Sanford. Yes, that Mike Sanford, former head coach at Western Kentucky, but also a player at Boise State, a coach at Boise State, a coach at Notre Dame. His dad coached at USC. It's safe to say he knows West Coast football, and specifically about the expansion of the Pac-12 conference. Jim, how are you doing?
Good, very good. We got a lot to get to, so I will actually just go right ahead. And no, we're gonna go right away.
Okay, hold on. Let me set it up for you.
You're gonna set it up.
Okay. Now these awards, we're really proud of them. Okay, just to let everybody know. All right, we partner with 76, our founding partner, to create these dynamic awards every week. And this is not like who has the best stats. Let's give them an award. Put a picture on social media. Like Jim and I are texting deep into the night, talking about it very specific about who has earned these awards. So these awards, the Go awards, fueled by 76, are for coaches and players that pump passion into every play, every staff meeting, every stadium, and they just keep going. Kind of like us. We haven't slept in 2.5 months. So Jim, take it away. Who won the Go awards fueled by 76?
Yeah, and I will go briefly through each one of these here because they will each wind up in the conversation as we go on throughout the show here. But our 5-star QB of the week, I think it's no surprise here that it was Dillon Gabriel of Oregon. I mean, I don't know if he could have played a better first half than he did. And then the Ducks just rolled in the second half. So 5-star QB going to Dillon Gabriel. Go gone. Nick Nash at San Jose State. Maybe a lot of people might not know who Nick Nash is, but you need to get to know him. He leads the country in receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. He had 17 catches on Saturday. He is go gone. That dude, I mean, Travis Hunter, like it's almost like this was the award that was made for Travis Hunter. Because he really is just that dude. I mean, he did it on offense. He did it on defense. He plays like almost every snap. It's ridiculous, and they really put the smackdown in that rivalry game. And then our headset hero, and this will then transition into what we're going into here with the next topic here, because what Jake Dicker did on Saturday was really impressive. When you think about where that team has what that team has gone through the last 13 months, from the announcement last August to not even knowing if this rivalry was going to continue, and then they signed the 5-year extension during the season last year, to then and the call comes down to that 4th and 1, and they're able to get a tackle for loss on that play. I think it's pretty obvious that Jake Dicker was going to take home that award.
Yeah, it was poetic. It had a scene of like a Hollywood script, like let's go option the rights to that game and this team's story. And their team does such a great job of capturing content behind the scenes. They've already shared some of it. But for the Cougs, I mean, what a big win. We've been calling these two teams, Oregon State and Washington State, America's teams, especially if they keep winning. Washington State, we've been on that train, and I think even Jack Thompson's driving it, but like we've been near the conductor, okay? Like since the beginning of this offseason, talking about how talented Washington State is. Thought they would beat Texas Tech at home. Thought out of all the years, they had a real shot to get UW now amid the realignment, the staff turnover, the roster turnover, etc. Heck, they almost beat them last year and ruined their season in the final regular season game of the year. And they didn't ruin UW's season, but definitely put a challenging taste in the mouths of all of those fans, especially the way that they did it. But I got to say, man, like outside of UW fans, I think fans around the country are really happy for Washington State. They're 3-0 against the Big Ten in the last 3 years. 2 times against Wisconsin, 1 on the road, last year at home. Now they beat UW. He's been saying it, Coach Dickert, since realignment began. They are a power conference team. And the facts back it up. The facts back it up. And now they should be talking CFP. It's going to be a challenge because they are not going to be in the group of 5 discussion. We'll get into that as the season goes on. They have to be the 11th best team in America, which means they have to be better than the 4th team in the Big Ten or the 4th team in the SEC or the 2nd team in the Big 12 or the ACC. And I think this win and their history will influence that. And if they win out, even with 1 loss, I think you're going to have a really good case to make. Jake Dickert will be one of the hottest coaches in the country if he isn't already. And as we transition to our thoughts around the new Pac-12 and expansion, the quote of the year that I've heard so far is from him, where he said his team talked about the game and they said, let's not make it about hating our opponent. I'm paraphrasing here, but let's make it about loving each other even harder. And what a quote for like America, like we don't have to hate each other in an election year. What if we just love who we love even harder? Like I just thought that was amazing. It gave me the chills as I saw that quote and saw his tears as I was calling a game in the booth in Lincoln, Nebraska. So we've been a part of the Pac-12 for a long time. We still are. We do content with them. Clearly last week we had both head coaches on. But Jim, we heard late Wednesday night that the expansion was going to happen. It got announced a few minutes later, and then it got officially announced a few hours later. Our friend Josh Issue, I don't think he slept at all. What were your initial? Yeah, there you go. Confirmed. Sources. Josh Issue hasn't slept. What do you think? I mean, you grew up in this league. You've worked for the Pac-12 conference for a really long time. What are your thoughts about the move that was made, and what do you think about moving forward?
It is exciting, for sure. And maybe it's just a little PTSD for me, but I definitely, I'm easing into this one, because we know it's not over. We know it's not done. I think that's the biggest thing. We know that, okay, here's 4 teams, but we know there's going to be at least 2 more, before this is all said and done. And who knows how many more beyond that. So I forget who I was having a conversation with last week. Like, this is the trailer for the movie. Like, I can't give my review of the movie just from the trailer. Like, we got to see how this this all kind of plays out. But it is exciting. I mean, those are 4 good schools. It'll be interesting to see how those attract other schools. I think it was kind of a smart decision to just go with 4 for now, and then kind of see, how that all shakes out. What, who goes, oh, that's an opportunity for me. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to come and do that. And it's funny. It's almost never the ones that are right at the forefront of your mind. It's always like, oh wait, now this one's coming. So it's, again, to me, it's the trailer. It's a really good trailer, and it's like showing promise for a good movie. But right now I'm gonna wait to get like super excited before seeing it all come together.
Yeah, we don't have an award, but if we had an award for like a commissioner, Teresa Gould would have got it, because I just love the style in which she has led. She said from day one she wanted to be bold, she wanted to be open-minded. I think she's been both of those things, let alone other things, how she's described her leadership traits. But I like it. I like it in terms of only adding 4 right now, because there's just so much interest, right? It was reported, we wrote about it at yoption.com, over a dozen schools reached out to the Pac-12 saying, hey, we want in too. I think when I look at these 4, I would argue that when the Pac-12, did what it did and only 2 remain, my calls at the time in a conversation with Trent Bray and Jake Dickert were something on the lines of, you should just go be Boise, in terms of go win. It doesn't matter. Just go win. You'll find your way to the playoff. Like, you will be recognized. And you're coming in this with, I think, a greater lead than Boise did back in the day with Dan Hawkins and Chris Peterson. And now Boise's in the party with them. And now San Diego State, which has always been one of those jobs that a lot of hot coordinators would call me about, me like, what do you think of that job? I want to go get that job. Now it's in this league. Fresno State has always been a team that nobody wants to play. They've knocked off big time teams in the past. And now what happens with them in their program this year, and what happens with their staff? Because I think all these jobs become very attractive. Do they keep the interim head coach? Does it become even more attractive for people on the outside? And then for Colorado State, we'll talk about it with Mike Norvell, who knows that place well. He lives about 35, 40 minutes away from that facility here in a few minutes on the podcast. Mike Sanford. Mike Norvell is the head coach. Yeah, thank you for the correction there. So I just think they're all really good schools that if they're given the resources, which the resources are going to be better than where they're coming from now, they're going to have the opportunity to make a real case and say, all right, well, we just beat Texas Tech. Let's go play Baylor. Let's go play some of these other teams, and let's go play SMU. Let's go play some of these other schools. We beat them, right? So I just love the idea that they went with 4. If I had to project, I think we'll see another 2 happen here in the pretty near future. And then I think it's breaks. You want to get yourself to 8, and then you want to compete to see if you get an automatic bid in the 14 if it expands to 14 teams in the playoff. And you want to kind of work the room. I would want a mic and a camera on Teresa Gould in all of her meetings, because she's probably figuring out now, like, what is it going to take? And then going back to these schools and then talking to some schools that probably left and saying, hey, what do you think? Like, it's going to be an amazing film one day when this thing, to your point, the trailer, I'm in. Here's my ticket. I'm buying the ticket stub. I'm taking the family. And what will it play out to be? I'm in. I love the idea. I don't sign up. I'm not in the camp of like, oh, whatever. It's just another Mountain West conference. Like, I don't think so. I think this league has too much cachet. And I think that the media rights thing, something will happen there. And always in realignment, there's only one guarantee, Jim, that something happens none of us anticipated. So let's go to the games around things that maybe we didn't anticipate this past weekend. UCLA, they lose in a big fashion, at least from the score. You watch the game, and I thought there was a lot of 50-50 balls that it went Indiana's way. I'll be in Indiana this weekend. I'll give you an update later in the week on them and that program. What'd you think about UCLA? I mean, it was this unique irony, right? Like, Pac-12 expands, and here's one of the first 2 teams that dipped out, and they lose in a big way in their home opener.
Yeah, it was a tough loss for sure. And it is funny because, the week before we were talking about, how Indiana had dominated their first 2 opponents, but, who were their first 2 opponents? Now it's like, oh, wow, maybe Indiana's, a real team to, keep an eye on in the Big Ten this year. But obviously there's a lot of turnover here for UCLA that, trying to figure out what they're doing. And I think, we knew that this was going to be a difficult year for the Bruins. As far as those 4 teams that were coming over to the Big Ten, because when you look at you look at them, you look at Washington. Even though they lost this weekend, I still think that Washington is going to have a solid football season. Like, that's not like a real red flag for them. Oregon, people were a little concerned with how things happened those first 2 weeks, and then it was just like, and even in the first quarter of this game on Saturday, it was kind of like and then it was just like, oh no, there's the Oregon team that we knew that they were going to be. I mean, what was it? All 6 of their touchdown drives, 74 yards or more. I mean, it was like, boom. They had 10 plays of 20 plus yards after having 6 the combined first 2 games. And Oregon State had only allowed 3 in the first 2 games combined. So it was just like, this was the Oregon team that everyone looked at and said, okay, that's why they were picked 3rd in the country. And then SC, they had the week off. So they probably were just, watching that Michigan game very intently and seeing Davis Warren throw 3 picks. And then, he's not going to be the starter this week for the Wolverines. So it was an interesting weekend as far as the Big Ten school, the Pac-12, 2 Big Ten, 4 schools, and where that all kind of like starts to put them in their slots, so to say, of where they're going to be in this conference.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note for the Bruin fans, because we have a lot of those fans that watch and listen to the show, and we appreciate the support. It's going to be a brutal stretch. You've got 3 of the most challenging games in the country coming up, your next 3 games, and physically that's going to take a toll, and your roster does not have the competitive depth that Jim just referenced at Oregon. But it's year 1, right? Like, Chip Kelly struggled in year 1, and I get what Deshaun Foster inherited in terms of 8, 9 win seasons, but so many players left, especially defensively, from this team and on the offensive line. So we'll see how it shakes out. I'll be over there tomorrow. Make sure I give a nice little report for our podcast in the back half of this week. Let's go through the Big 12 quickly. Utah, slow start. They beat the Pig Farmer and Bryson Barnes. It was kind of fun to watch freshman and Isaac Wilson, former Elite 11 guy. Elite 11 quarterbacks are playing well, by the way. Give a shout out to Dylan Raiola. Saw him as well over the weekend do some good things. Colorado, they dominate on the road. Shador playing well. God, when it gets around the NFL time, we are going to love talking to so many people about him because he can play, but then there's a lot of things that you just don't like, right? I'd imagine as an evaluator, or maybe you do like because he's got an edge about him. I don't know. I'd be curious. We'll have Jim Nagy and a bunch of people on to talk about that.
It's the same with Travis. I mean, it's
Yes.
like, is it offense or defense, or does it have to be what Deion's always like, why make him choose? Like, so it'll be
he's that
interesting to
dude.
see. Yeah, he is definitely that dude.
Ready, set. Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Okay, so Thursday night we saw Arizona State, Kenny Dillingham. Again, we've been saying it from the preseason. They are not the worst team in the Big 12, far from it. They go 3-0 in a tough game on the road in Texas. They beat Texas State, and then they all stay in Texas to continue to recruit that state because that's what you do when you're at Arizona State right now and you're in the Big 12. But I really want to talk about Arizona and you. You know, you're an alum of this place. You've tracked this program as well as anybody in the country. They lost, and kind of like UCLA. Like you look at the score and you're like, "Whoa, what happened?" So what happened?
They got beaten by a team that's better than them right now. I think in all honesty, I mean, obviously, it's a new head coach and they're trying to figure out all their new systems and everything like that. The offensive line, I think, is still not where they want that to be right now, and it's kind of funny because that was theoretically a strength of this team coming into the season, not something that you really were all that worried about. But the body language a little bit is a little worrying, and just seeing like, hey, let's get going here. And I think they have this week off to kind of get everything back together, and then they'll get Utah, and Utah will be coming off this week's game from Oklahoma State, which should be a wild one. So I think for Arizona, I think this is going to be really a week to find themselves and get them ready for their first ever Big 12 game against Utah. So it'll be interesting, in that respect, as far as the realignment stuff goes.
Yeah, well, the core of this team has never lost in that fashion, right? I mean, if you think about it, when Team X started playing, when Noah Fafita started playing, I mean, they've lost tight games, but it was never like this, where you're right. It looked like they just got beat by a better team. But I'll say this, I thought they had their opportunities too. Yeah. Getting the ball coming out of halftime, I'm like, okay, here we go, a little momentum here for this team. But it just shows that when you're playing a really physical out and really talented team, especially with a talented quarterback like Avery Johnson, when you get your shot, you can't miss. UCLA had their shot at start the fourth quarter, missed, and all of a sudden it's a 3-score game. They had a chance to cut it to a 1-score game. Arizona had their shot on the first drive, missed it, and all of a sudden it's a rout. And then to your point, I've called games at Little Manhattan, Kansas. That place can swallow you. And you're right. I love Brent Brennan navigating the challenging week, which is coming off a big loss.
And it's one thing before we move on to that. It was interesting that in the same week, both Arizona and Washington both killed by penalties. Yeah. I think that's probably the thing that both of these head coaches are talking to their teams about is the penalties. I mean, Arizona had nine penalties in that game. Washington had 16, and in crucial situations too, which is I think the killer. So that's the thing for both teams that need to get cleaned up.
It's a theme, right? First year head coaches, Jonathan Smith of Michigan State, who's going to be coming to Eugene here pretty soon, in about 2 weeks, right? They had double-digit penalties again. So I think there's something. You getting your team to try to play to the line, play to the razor's edge, but not over it, is much easier said than done. A team that I think is playing at a really high level right now are the Cal Bears. Justin Wilcox squad, they beat future Pac-12 member San Diego State at home. No surprise, going up against freshman quarterback advantage Justin Wilcox and his defense and Peter Sirmon all game long. But Fernando Mendoza is playing at a high level. They go to Florida State this week. Florida State is going to give them their best. We wrote about that in our newsletter on Sunday. But there's a real world where Cal can help the Boo Birds come out in Tallahassee against our good friend Mike Norvell, who we're big fans of him and what he's done as the head coach at multiple places. But did you see this coming for Cal? Like, did you see undefeated Cal going to Florida State as at least our favorite? I don't know what the line is, but I'd imagine their favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more shocking part of this, obviously, is that Florida State is 0-3. I mean, this is only the second time since Bobby Bowden got hired that they've started the season 0-3. One was in his first year, and one was just a couple years ago. Ironically, that they, that basically the one that got Norvell the job. But yeah, I think obviously Florida State, they got to figure out what's going on there, because ever since the Travis injury last year, it has just not been the same team. Like I think it's 6 straight games where they haven't gotten 300 total yards, which starts after the game that the game they got hurt in the middle of, starting from that game after that. So I don't know if it's just a mentality thing or whatever, but because clearly, they've recruited good players to go to Florida State. I mean, I don't think talent is the question there. But sticking with Cal, since we are the West Coast people here, Fernando has been great. I mean, it's hard to. It's how can you not like Fernando? But also, I think the most impressive thing was their running game on Saturday night without not even playing. I mean, so if that's something they can continue, you said Javian Thomas had a good game, Kadarius Callaway had a good game. If they've really kind of got a nice little stable of backs there, like, this is a team that could be dangerous.
Yeah, in that league. I mean, let's just add to the desire. Utah and Arizona play in the Big 12, and maybe play Cal in the first round of a playoff instead of Oregon, right? And let's just see what happens here in the postseason. Okay, this has been a blast. So many good things have happened, right? San Jose State, you referenced Nick Nash. They're playing in Pullman this weekend. So Coug fans, party, celebrate, but put the fireball away on Wednesday and get yourself right for a Friday night game, because now you're getting everybody's best. That is how it is going to roll the rest of this season. San Jose State, their quarterback was a backup quarterback at Wazoo. We'll touch on that later in the week. UNLV, they are undefeated as well. And you know what? Our podcast is undefeated too, Jim. We've done a heck of a job. And today, really excited for our guest, Mike Sanford. He's been a head coach in college football, was the interim head coach at Colorado. He's been an assistant up and down the West Coast, also at Notre Dame, a bunch of different stops. But most importantly, he's got mastery around these 4 new schools that are set to join the Pac-12 conference. So this conversation, of course, is fueled by our founding partner, 76. It's keeping you in the know as you are on the go, go, go. So let's get right to today's conversation with our good friend, Mike Sanford. Okay, as mentioned, here he is, Coach Mike Sanford. Coach, we go back a long time, man, like young coaches. I don't even know if we could either grow a beard. You got a nice one right now, man. But thanks for coming on.
I have to. It's actually required in this state.
Yeah, well said, man. But I mean, we probably met like 05?
Yeah, I think it was 05, 06. I remember you were a GA at USC. And I was at UNLV in 05 and 06 working for my dad. I was a graduate assistant, and then I got hired at Stanford in 07. And I remember we talked specifically, I remember this vividly, that we talked before the USC Stanford game.
Yeah, we did.
In 2007.
You know what? It's funny about that game. That was an amazing day for college football, a miserable day for the Trojans, and I was mic'd up for it. So you could like go back and see it on the internet now, and it's a thing that I bring to broadcast now, because John David Booty, if you recall, he hits his finger on a helmet,
broken finger,
and that's right. The whole time the staff is asking me like, is JD good to go? So I'm playing catch on the sideline with him, or watching him throw with Sanchez or something, and we're 10, 12 yards apart, and he's dealing. I mean, you know the quarterback position as well as anybody. And in the game, he throws a pick on like a 16-yard dig. And what we would learn afterwards is like when that finger, that little pointer finger is banged up, like the control for like longer throws is what kind of goes. And that went on that throw. Who knows if it would have been picked anyway, and then the rest is history. In Stanford, and you guys probably had an epic party. Like, what was that locker room like after that celebration that Michael Molinari produced that game, by the way, and Ted Robinson called?
That was one of the most epic, just everything type of days of my life. You go in as 41.5-point underdogs, I believe we were in that game. And that was the height of the Trojan Empire. and the build of the Stanford team that the year before under Walt Harris, I believe, had gone 1-11. You played for Walt, didn't you?
Sure did. Yeah. Wore that helmet right there for old
Panthers,
Coach Harris.
Baby.
Yeah.
Pitt Panthers.
Let's go. Yeah. Backyard brawl.
Yeah, no doubt. But so, yeah, it was just, I blacked out. All I do remember is that I think it was the touchdown pass in the back corner of the end zone to Mark Bradford, who grew up like miles from the Coliseum. I remember I actually jumped on top of the press box like table, and Dave Shaw, who's so mild mannered and all times, looked at me like I had 5 heads. I remember that very vividly. He and my excitement levels at times were varied. One of my closest confidants in my time at Stanford, but we had very different excitement levels.
Yeah, so let's set the table for there, because there's a lot I want to talk to you about. One, of course, the expansion of the Pac-12, your history with Boise State and so many schools in the Mountain West, calling games, coaching in games. You played in the WAC, but you know that neighborhood and that community extremely well. But I also want to talk about like the time that you had in your coaching career, because you've had some amazing mentors. Chris Peterson being one of them. You just referenced David Shaw, Jim Harbaugh, you're on that staff. Brian Kelly, you worked for him at Notre Dame. Your father, who you grew up, I'm sure in many staff rooms, let alone practice fields. Like when you pull all that together, now you're in Colorado doing the media, and you're kind of doing everything you could do in the media, from radio to TV to calling games, the high school games. Like it's amazing. But when you pull from those experiences, like what do you initially draw to from a leadership, organizational, head coaching perspective, and things that you say, this is what allows someone to have great success?
The number one thing that I always come back to, and it took me a long time to figure this out, is authenticity. When you're in a position of leadership, and being a college football head coach for a Power 5 program or even a G5 program, I mean, the amount of people that you are essentially answering to as a leader and you're leading it's countless. I mean, it's not just, the 118 players in your locker room. It's the support staff, it's sports medicine, it's the strength staff, compliance staff, which doesn't exist anymore. But there's so many different people that you are leading, and then the fan base. I mean, you essentially, in a small town, like I was a head coach of that small town of Bowling Green, Kentucky, at Western Kentucky. I think I tried too hard in my first stint as a head coach to fit in to the Southern culture, which, by the way, Bowling Green, Kentucky is very Southern culturally.
Like what's an example of that?
I mean, so my introductory press conference, my previous jobs that I'd worked at were Notre Dame, Stanford, and then several years before Yale, right? So I had been around a lot of we'll say very highly intellectual individuals. And those were my peers, like on campus, the kids that you coach. Those were the incredibly intelligent people. Like I absolutely knocked out my introductory press conference. If I had been coaching at one of those 3 schools, I looked out there and I just read the room. I'm like, oh man, I don't fit in here, or at least this version of me doesn't fit in. And then you kind of fast forward. And I actually recently, somehow on YouTube, an old press conference of mine came up after we beat Middle Tennessee State. And I'm like, did I have a Southern drawl? I'm like, who's that guy? I grew up in Seal Beach, California, riding skateboards and shredding. I mean, who is that guy? I didn't even recognize him. And so I think that's part of it. And then I look back at a guy like Jim Harbaugh, who's so uniquely him in so many different ways. Love him, hate him, think he's weird, think he's bizarre, think he's out there. But there's an authenticity that players they immediately just are drawn to. And I think that's what I've learned over these years is no matter what you're doing, just be super authentic to who you are. I've respected that about you, Yogi, for a long time. A guy from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I believe, or definitely from Pennsylvania. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, from PA.
And now you're just a total SoCal bro, I don't know, man.
Shredding in Seal Beach, baby. Let's go.
I do. I've always really respected that about you, man. Is just you love the deep thought around the game of football and around sport, about some of these people's stories. You love telling stories, and that's what you've leaned into. But you also draw from your background of being influenced by a guy like Pete Carroll and being around that, that time. So I think just your experiences create who you are. No question about it. But at the end of the day, you got to be true to who you really are in that moment of your life based on your experiences. And I think it makes you a much more effective leader.
Yeah, that's well said. One of my favorite things in head coaching is watching coaches get their second shot, right? Whether it's Clay Helton, develop at USC in real time on the biggest stage, or one of them in the world in college football, and now go to Georgia Southern and kind of get his second shot to reset. We've seen that with other coaches as well in the past. For you, though, you didn't stop coaching after your first head coaching stint. You continue to do it. And you did get that second shot in like the most unique of circumstances, right? You get it at Colorado, a place that you probably thought you'd be at for a really long time. I thought you were so incredible, man, as the interim head coach. We called a couple of your games that year. It felt really authentic. And we have known each other for a long time, but I would imagine any of my peers who called your games would say the same thing. I wonder, though, having said that, did you live that? Like when you look back on your time, if you watch a press conference of you leading the Buffs in a unique way before Coach Prime took over and that whole thing became what it is now, would you say that, yeah, you know what, I did hit that note that I learned from all of my mentors along the way?
I did. I think that was probably the most authentically me, because first off, it was a great fit for me because I grew up in the West Coast. I grew up in, and played in the Rocky Mountain region at Boise State. So there was just a lot of natural, just pure fit. And that's why I think it's so wild when athletic directors hire people from way out of their region. And sometimes it works. There's no question. Like Dan Lanning at Oregon's working, and he's not a Pacific Northwesterner. But I think Dan Lanning's very authentic to who he is as well. And I think that's why he's been so successful. But then I look and no offense, like you look at Steve Adazio, a guy that's a true New Englander at Colorado State. Like that was a weird fit. It was a strange fit, especially in Group 5 schools. I think when you are a little bit more intimately involved with the community and you're more accessible, sometimes I think it just is insane to think that athletic directors would hire somebody that just isn't a fit geographically, or their backgrounds, or just come from out of like left field when they make the hire. But then for me, like CU was a perfect fit. And then I also, I set out to just do me, like be unique to who I am. And I think the players really saw that and they rallied behind it. And we had a lot of fun, man. And it's really hard to have fun when you're 0-5. I took over that job. I think we had over half of our starters from the previous season in 2021 had entered the portal. And at the time, CU didn't have the ability to bring in transfer students because of some academic restrictions on campus. And so our roster was in a tough spot, just the bottom line. The amount of freshmen and sophomores that we had to start in games, and even walk-ons. I think we had a game where we started 5 guys. I wanted to actually have the dog squad, was our special teams, have 11 guys on kickoff that were all walk-ons, and we did it in a game. But we had a lot of fun, Yogi. We did some crazy stuff, even at practice. For example, I've always loved a good glizzy, a good hot dog, And so last week of practice, we faced a stretch that was like Oregon, at Washington, at USC, and Utah. In 2022, those 4 teams were pretty dang good. You know that, Yogi. And that was our final 4 games of the year. And I'm like, man, these players, especially these seniors, man, they're so beat down from how this year's gone, how their careers have gone at Colorado. And I'm like, you know what? I walked down to Pearl Street in Boulder, and I found the vendor. He sells street meat, man. He sells hot dogs. And I said, hey, I want to hire you to feed our team after a practice. I'm going to surprise them. I want you to hide in the indoor facility behind the curtain. And then right it was when practice was ending, I had our ops people just peeled back the curtains, and there's just a street meat vendor in our indoor facility ready for all the glizzy distribution to our entire team. It's just stuff like that. We just had fun, man. I wanted to create great memories for these players amongst a really challenging time.
Yeah, no, you did that. And you did it even for us. They were fortunate enough to call games and call your games. Okay, so let's talk about some memories, because I know you've got great memories at Boise State. You've got great memories of the Pac-12 conference, right? You were a head coach in that league, as do I. When you heard of the news of the expansion or the rebuild of a conference that is as old and as historic as any in the history of sport, probably around the world, what are your initial thoughts around the first 4 in? And what's your thoughts on how it's going to move forward?
Yeah, so I'll go through the wave of emotions and why my emotions were such. My dad played in the Pac-8 conference, played at USC in 1973 to 1977, played for 2 legendary USC head coaches, John McKay and John Robinson. My dad GA'd at USC. It was his first real Division I coaching job. And then my childhood was spent on the sidelines at the Coliseum and at Heritage Hall. I mean, I grew up in that facility. I mean, 8 years of my childhood from second grade until my freshman year of high school when my dad left for Notre Dame. Shame on him, right? But yeah, that was what I knew. I knew the Pac-8, my dad played in it. The Pac-10, my dad coached in it. And then I coached in the Pac-12, with Stanford, again with CU. I love this conference. I've always thought it's the premier conference in all of college football. So when the news came down about the breaking up of the Pac-12, and really Colorado was it felt like the final straw going to the Big 12, where it just fell apart overnight. I was devastated, man. I was angry. I just didn't understand it. There were a lot of emotions that I felt, and I voiced them a lot to my wife. I think she was tired of hearing about my take on the Pac-12 disintegrating overnight.
Same. Yeah.
But then, you fast forward to just last week, and my emotions on the other side of the pendulum were just jubilance, joy, because for me, I love Boise State. I played there. I was formed into who I am today as a man, but also who I was as a coach by men like Dirk Cutter, who recruited me to Boise State, and then Chris Peterson, who was my position coach and offensive coordinator for my 5 years there at Boise State. And it doesn't stop there. Justin Wilcox was a graduate assistant at Boise State. I absolutely love that place. And then I got a chance to return as an as an alum, being the offensive coordinator in 2014. I was there one season. We won the Fiesta Bowl, and then I left myself to go to Notre Dame. It seems like a family theme there. But I was just excited to think that the childhood conference that I was so passionate about, and I learned football, and then my alma mater, like what formed me as a man in my formative years, 18 to 23 years old, like they were going to collide. And then, oh, by the way, I'm living 35 minutes from CSU's campus. Like I was through the roof, man. I was like, this is the best day of my college football media journey because I'm so excited to hopefully have some type of role in bringing the stories to the people, because I just love this conference.
Okay, so where do you, Jim and I have talked about it a bunch prior to bringing you on the show here today. Where do you think it goes? Like, what do you envision 2 years from now? The Pac-12 conference is what?
The Pac-12 conference is going to have Stanford and Cal in it. I believe so. That's not based off any insider information. I'm not talking to Bernard Muir currently. I'm not texting him, hey, when you go into the Pac-12? I just think that once it all shakes down with the ACC, okay, I think the ACC and the pending, litigation that's happening between the Clemson and Florida States, at some point the SEC attorneys are going to get involved, and their attorneys and their war chest financially is big enough where they're going to get what they want if they indeed do want to add Clemson and Florida State. And I don't know exactly where Miami fits into this, but once there's a chink in the armor, we saw it with the Pac-12. It's a free-for-all. And I think the free-for-all for Stanford and Cal would be to rejoin their geographical fit. And then I think after that, I believe that maybe another like-minded university in the next 4 to 6 years, maybe UCLA, comes back and joins a peer of theirs in Cal Berkeley. The UC system typically likes to roll together historically. And you could call me crazy. You could say it's wishful thinking. The one thing that I do know from doing some media stuff is the Pac-12 network is alive and well, and the studio is alive and well. And it's not just producing games for Oregon State and Washington State. It's doing some ACC content. It's doing some Mountain West content. Heck, the game that I just did with CSU was produced by the Pac-12 network. Is it a complete coincidence that a week later they're added to the conference? I don't know, maybe. But I also think that partnership with the ACC and the Pac could be an amazing alliance of two true regionalized bi-coastal conference, where the winner of those two conferences gets an automatic bid into the playoffs. And so that's what I see. It might be a little bit out there, but that's at least what my brains and my background in knowing some of these conferences and the behind the scenes deals does kind of make me feel could happen.
One of my favorite parts of this past offseason was when you and I went to dinner with Ashley Adamson and Mr. and Mrs. McCaffrey, that family. We were in Denver, and on the side, I kind of told you about Y option as like an idea and a thought. And you were all about it. You were like, yes, yes, yes. And the point I'm trying to say is that A, thank you, because it's real and we're doing it now. But B, the whole concept behind it is thoughtful dialogue in sport. And I love how much thought you've put into the concept of a reimagined Pac-12. Let me tell you where I net out on this thing. I'm curious your thoughts.
I am extremely curious.
Okay. And again, on purpose, I'm not like sourced on this. This is just from the world of Y option here and the world of Coach and I here in this conversation. In 2 years, I think it's safe to presume that the playoffs are going to go from 12 to 14. Let's hope. I do not feel as confident in the ACC and the schools finding any semblance of agreement to say goodbye to a couple teams. I do think, though, that it's so tenuous right now that they can't just say, hey, Cal and Stanford, we get it. It's a way better fit. You'll make more money. Go for it. So something's got to hit there, right? Like for the ACC to say, we're going to say goodbye to 4 teams or 5 teams, I think that's like a big ask for them. So I think, like, on one hand, we want chaos to ensue so teams can dip. On the other hand, we might also want them to say, no one's going anywhere in terms of Clemson and Florida State and the lawsuit and the litigation they have currently. It might make it easier if they could just end that case sooner than later and allow Cal and Stanford, to your point, to come on back. Point being, I'd love to see them come back. I'd love to see maybe one of the Arizonas come back, a Utah come back. And I don't know any of the contracts that they've signed with their respective league, and who knows what contracts even mean in the era we're in right now. But here's what I'm going to put out as a possible idea. What if, right, because we're in a whole new world, and this has been public where a lot of leagues have talked about private equity. Like, what if you gave a place that you know well, Boise State, a place like we know well in Fresno State, San Diego State, if you gave them, let's just ballpark it, let's just call it $25 million from private equity. So we're not talking media rights, and I'm not a media rights expert, and I won't claim to be. But if you said to those schools, hey, here's some money to adjust your facilities, to adjust your staff, to be on a relative playing field with some of these schools, like if you comped them to other small towns in rural communities, Texas Tech, Baylor, or you see where I'm going with the Big 12.
Yeah,
all of a sudden,
real quick, you did call Boise, Idaho a rural community. I take great offense to that.
Okay. Well, yeah. And to be fair, I haven't ever spent a lot of time in Boise. I've been to Coeur d'Alene a few times. So
you got to get to Boise, man. It's
okay. I need to get to Boise.
Yeah.
But to that point, like, I wonder, right? Like, if you comp Boise to the Little Apple of Manhattan, Kansas, where I've been to many times, or to Lawrence, Kansas, and all of a sudden you gave it some cash. I wonder in a couple of years if it had a facility. Because right now, I would take, if you took the top of the Mountain West, or excuse me, if you took the 4 teams that came over from Mountain West, then you add in at least how Washington State is playing right now. I know Oregon State just, lost a tough one and a big one against Oregon. But if you took those teams and comp them to, call it the middle of the pack in the Big 12, I bet they'd split the majority of those games. Like, I don't see a dramatic difference when I'm watching those teams on tape. You know them better than I am. You cover this league with great detail. Am I crazy, A, to think that? And then B, if you can get some of those horses to come on back in a 14-team playoff, I would imagine goal number 1 for a revamped Pac-12 is to get an automatic berth from the Pac-12, not the Pac-12 and ACC combined, but just from the Pacific 12 Conference or whatever it ends up being called in 2 years. And one of your 14 automatic bids is coming from this league versus being grouped into the group of 5. And if it is grouped into the group of 5, I think it's already going to be the best conference among those. So ideally you get an automatic no matter what.
Yeah, one of the things that you did say is about the facilities and the upgrades. The one thing I've learned from being a Boise State alum, I was there when it really was an FCS program that had just transitioned in the mid to late 90s. To Division I football. We were in the Big West Conference when I was recruited to Boise State. Doesn't exist on the football side, at least to my knowledge. It might be in some strange non-scholarship capacity or something now. But, that program from a facility standpoint, when I left Boise State in 2014 to go to Notre Dame, I got to Notre Dame and I was like, these facilities aren't very nice because of how nice the facilities were at Boise State. And then fast forward to just this past weekend, I'm up at the CSU-CU game, the Rocky Mountain Showdown. I bring my wife, and we're going up to join the suite up there. And my wife looks at me. She's like, this facility is better than CU. This is one of the best facilities I've ever seen. So there has been a tremendous amount of building in anticipation of this moment in time, which is where teams like CSU, like Boise State, have been asked to join the table of a power conference. And so they're ready for that. They're also thriving communities. Fort Collins, Colorado, Boise, Idaho. The Valley's always been a huge population base for Fresno State. There's a lot of humanity in that valley between Bakersfield and Fresno. And then clearly San Diego State. I mean, they just built a brand new stadium. They just need to fill it. I think that these 4 schools in their locales where they're located is a perfect geographical fit for the Pac-12 conference. And they're also thriving communities unlike, frankly, some of these Big 12 communities that are not thriving. People aren't moving to Manhattan, Kansas. I love Kansas State's program, but like, I'm not going to relocate from California if I live in California to go to Manhattan, Kansas. I'm going to go to Boise. I'm going to go to Fort Collins. I'm not, San Diego is always going to be I think the best city in the state of California. And then Fresno's always had a natural population base. So I think that they're programs that have always kind of fit the bill. And I love what Teresa Gould did in bringing these 4 particular programs, because I think they do stand out in the current Mountain West for the next 2 years as teams that are primed for that next move.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to track. I was a huge fan and am a huge fan of only inviting 4 and then hitting pause, because I think the majority of at least media and or sports fan was like Pac-12, Pac-2. It was kind of a, punchline. And then to see that happen overnight, kind of drops around 10 p.m. and here Jim and I are on the phone, talking through it and talking to a bunch of people that were a part of that. And then it became like a hot story the next day. And, it's been reported, and we reported it here at Y Option too, of like, there's been over a dozen schools that have reached out to the Pac-12 seeking interest to join. So I think there's something that is a really cool draw, and I just can't wait. So my last question on that for you, because you've played, coached at, been in the league of the schools that are joining now the Pac-12, what do you think it does for Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, Colorado State in recruiting now that they join a league and a shield in the logo that's got a tremendous reputation?
Well, one of the things that I was concerned with the falling apart of the Pac-12 as a conference is the SEC has already really reached into the West Coast talent, especially the top, the upper echelon of the West Coast high school players, and dipped into those waters the last 5 years, and has done very well. Just look at the quarterbacks in the SEC. Most of them are coming from the Western United States, and while I think that's okay, that's part of a free market. I'm a fan of it, but I was afraid that there weren't going to be great options for a power conference in your own region. And I love the fact that schools like Boise State, who, by the way, have competed at an incredibly high level, look at their head-to-heads against Power 5 programs in the old Pac-12. I mean, they were 3-0 versus Oregon as a program until the dogfight just a week and a half ago. This is a program that has beaten Oregon State consistently, Washington State. It's had a lot of success against teams, across the Pac-12 as it used to exist. But I love the fact that now that there is an option for the West Coast homebody, if you will, or at least wants to be within a 2-hour flight from mom and dad, that you can play power conference football and be within this region. And that's the thing that I think so important is regionalized football. It's almost disappearing, but I think this gives hope to a regionalized power conference. And that's where my heart lies, because I'm a West Coast kid. I played my high school football, at Los Alamitos. And so I want to see kids from Los Alamitos want to go just like Malachi Nelson did to Boise State, and then see the fruits of that decision pay out with being able to play in front of mom and dad. I think that's important. I think that's a part of your college experience. And so I'm very excited about the recruiting opportunities for CSU, Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State. Yeah,
it's interesting to hear that thought around regionalization, right? Michael Wilbon went nuts over the weekend on his show, PTI, and talked about the regionalization of college football and why people watch. I just came from Lincoln, Nebraska, and it was so cool to call a game there. And you look at that roster, you look at Iowa's roster, like you look at a lot of college football rosters, there's still a ton of regionalization around other parts of the country. It was just like the Pac-12, to your point, like players just getting poached and just taken from, how is the top running back at Alabama a couple years ago coming from the Bay Area, or the tight end at Georgia, right? And I don't think that's ever going to stop. And I think, those two leagues have separated a little bit, not a little bit, a lot, right? Even from financially in terms of the Big Ten and the SEC. 100%. But I do think at their core, there's still a beautiful regional element to those leagues. And I know what the 4 new teams in the Big Ten have done, and it's expanded that league. But the majority of those leagues still lean into what we love about college football. So I'm with you. I hope that happens with the Pac-12. Clearly rooting for it. What I'm not rooting for is like something to happen in like 6-8 years, because I'm like, I don't want to be 50 in this thing flip. Right. Like this needs to be faster. So we'll see. Who knows what will happen. All right, before we cut you loose, Bo Nix, he's been on this podcast. We kick out a part of our newsletter called 5-Star Advice. advice from a 5-star quarterback from the book 5-Star QB, which I know you know well. You've been around Bo covering the Broncos. What have you learned about him and his approach amid success, right? Notoriety, also challenges when it comes to playing at the level, which is the highest one and the most challenging position in the world?
The timing of the question, Yogi, couldn't be any better because I was yesterday at Empower Field covering the Broncos Steelers game, and I was actually in the press conference with Bo Nix and asked him a question because I noticed that he looked very comfortable and empty. And it took till the 7 minutes remaining in the second quarter to actually get an empty, which is something that he operated so effectively at Oregon, whether it started an empty and then brought a running back into that backfield, or started in 2x2 or 3x1 and then motion it back out to create empty. Bo was cooking an empty yesterday. I think it's something that Broncos fans would love to see more of. But the one thing I have noticed about Bo, I was at every training camp practice. I interviewed him at Senior Bowl. Interviewed him or talked to him at the combine as well, is his response mechanism is next level. He had a terrible first practice in pads with the Denver Broncos. Of course, now I'm in the media, I evaluate what I see, and I called it like it is. Show up the next day. Great practice. Doesn't make the same mistake twice. The guy is machine-like, almost has a Terminator-like quality of addressing deficiencies, addressing anything that he maybe came short in a game or came short in a practice, and make sure that he works his tail off to not repeat that, that type of a mistake. And I think that response mechanism is from his journey. It was, playing at Auburn as a 5-star dual threat, the top guy in the country, going to Auburn. And it, frankly, with coaching changes, performance, wasn't elite at the very end of his Auburn career. Actually, under my former boss, Brian Harsin, there was some unevenness, and he just needed a fresh start. He got it in Oregon. And I think he's shown along the way in every step of his journey the ability to respond between the ears. And that's such an important characteristic of a quarterback. I think that the number one characteristic of a quarterback is toughness. And I think that starts with mental toughness and the ability to respond to adverse situations. It does make Bo Nix a very special individual to cover. I can't call him a young man. He's almost 25, but I've been really impressed with his response mechanism, Yogi.
Yeah, kind of like what I referenced about head coaches. Like, I can't wait, it's so early in the season, but I can't wait to year 2 with Bo Nix just to see, right? And so much of that position we saw earlier, recording this on Monday, Bryce Young, sounds like he's not going to be the quarterback, at least this week, after being the number 1 pick a year ago. Like, so much around you has to be right for it to work. And there's so much growth, especially when you're leaning in the way that we know Bo to do. Obviously, you've covered Colorado, right? You lived it. You coached there. You're the interim head coach there. You cover it now. You live in that state. We all watch it from afar. And, of course, it feels like the algorithm just puts it on your phone whenever you turn it on. What's reality as you see it for the Buffs right now as they move forward with clearly 2 stars in college football on the field and an icon on the sideline?
I think their reality, because I'm a believer in you're only as good as your last game. And I was really impressed with their last game. I was there. I was covering the game, for CBS Sports Colorado. I did the post-game show, had a chance to talk to one of their transfer receivers, LeJonte Wester, tremendous young man. I came away impressed. And that's hard to say for a guy that was, frankly, we were all fired from that university not too long ago. And so I was on this media side, I try to take away any type of bias and just evaluate it for what I see. And I see a tremendously improved defense. And I see that Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, and then their slew of receivers, they'll give you a chance in every game. But I also think that, the game against Nebraska, it was a bit of an indictment on the ability to protect the passer while not really having a clearly defined run game. So any game that CU plays, I really believe in my heart of hearts, you can't predict it. Like, there is no predicting this team, because if the game's close and Shedeur Sanders gets the ball with, a minute 50 to go and he's got 95 yards to drive, we already saw that movie last year in the Rocky Mountain Showdown against CSU. He has that crazy ability to be calm when everything around him is so chaotic. And he's got a tremendous talent for seeing the field, for improvisation. That this team has a chance to win every game it's in. And frankly, the Nebraska game showed that if they can't win the game in the trenches, that can happen as well. So it is such a week to week story around here. And I think nationally with CU, and Coach Prime does bring the magnifying glass effect because of him, because of his personality, what he did as an athlete in baseball and football, and then what he's done in the media and really in culture. He's a cultural impact type of a figure. That magnifying glass is just always just focused squarely on Boulder, Colorado, and frankly, being in the local media, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I kind of made the decision when he was hired, because it's easy to, I think, be a pessimist in the world. And I was like, I'll just be entertained by it, right? And we got to call one of his games, and, you have your coaches meetings, and it couldn't have gone better. Clearly, there's things that you love and things that you're like, whoa. But that's life. I think that's sport. So for you, my last one, man, is that you're such a great human. I believe that. And you're such a thoughtful guy, and you're not old. Yet you've chosen to go down this path in the media. Like, where do you net out? Are you someday trying to coach? Do you think that way? Do you just try to connect to the present moment? Are you thinking, no, like I got this other life now? Like my colleague at the Big Ten Network, Jared DiNardo, said he wanted to coach till he was 50 and then open a restaurant and do media. He basically did that. Like he stopped, I think, at 49, and he's been at the Big Ten Network for 18 years, been in the media for over 20. So where's your headspace when you think about two lanes and maybe even more that you can go down?
It's a great question, Yogi. And, I was watching Jim Harbaugh's press conference when he was asked about how long he's going to coach, and it reverberated with me. I'm a son of a coach, just like Jim is, my former boss. And he said something along the lines that it's a Jack Harbaughism that, as a coach in Harbaugh's, we coach until we can't coach anymore, until we go out into that practice field and we just physically can't do it anymore. And then we add 2 years to that. And I think that's inside of me. That's in my DNA. My dad is still coaching. He is a 69-year-old high school head coach in Las Vegas, and he's going to be competing for a state championship in back-to-back years. He's 4-0 at Faith Lutheran High School in Vegas, up there in Summerlin. So, I love coaching, but one thing I've learned in this last year and a half is I love being a dad. I love coaching my kids. I was my daughter's softball head coach. The Savages was our name. And I love being able to take my experiences from being around a very high level of football and give those experiences to, in this case, 13 and 14-year-old girls on my team. I love that part of it. And I actually love the media. I've always wanted to do this. When I was about a 20-year-old, I said, I want to play as long as I can. And then I want to coach as long as I can. And then I want to be either in politics or I want to be the next John Madden, right? Of course, that's the easy thing to say 20 some odd years ago. For me, I love doing local media. I love having skin in the game with the Denver Nuggets and with the Colorado Avalanche and the Rapids of the MLS. So working at Altitude Sports Radio is so fun because we're owned by the same parent company, Kroenke Sports and Enterprises, as the Nuggets and the Avs and the Rapids. So I get to be involved in something local. You feel like you're a part of a team. But then I love calling games. I had a chance to do my first college TV game, and it was a blast. I get that same kind of flutter in my heart before the game starts like I did when I was a play caller up in the press box. So I want to do this and keep growing and learning. So right now I'm getting all the reps that I can, and I appreciate you giving me another rep right here on Y Option. But yeah, that's what I want to do, and I want to keep getting better. It's fun at 42 years old. To do something you're uncomfortable with. It's a great spot to be in. It makes you wake up every morning excited for whatever lesson you're going to learn. And then I also get a chance to put my kids in bed every once in a while, which I didn't do for 18 years.
Yeah, I love that. Again, so thoughtful. You've always been that way, and you're crushing it. I mean, you're just getting going, man. You've got a huge future. I can remember when I was maybe like mid 30s, late 30s. And I was like frustrated with something. And I remember somebody in the media world said, dude, like you're young. And like in the moment, you're like, no, I need to like be doing this game or whatever. And it's just a reminder that like, A, like be patient, but B, it doesn't really matter. Because when you get to the 50 and you put the headset on, as you experienced calling the game that you referenced, you're like, I get to coach the viewer. And I've always thought that as a broadcaster, like celebrate the game and coach the viewer. That's the job. That's it in its entirety. And then you get your own little team that you kind of be with if you're lucky enough to travel with the same group. So I just can't wait to watch your star to continue to shine brighter and brighter, man. The game needs people like you. So please stay in it. Unless you go coach, no problem. But we want like the first interview, okay? Want the first one. So.
Well, I appreciate that, Yogi, and it's always been fun to catch up with you. You and I've done a bunch of production meetings over the time in between when we met as GAs, young coaches wearing pleated slacks, and we've always had some tremendous conversations. You have some good, I'm sure you have some good pleated slacks pictures from your early 2000s days coaching in college football. But yeah, man, I've loved watching your journey. It's so cool to see you a part of a conference now that I love dearly too. I mean, I coached at the University of Minnesota. I lived in Indiana. I think my dad's coached at 3 different schools in the state of Indiana: Indiana State, Notre Dame, and Purdue. So that was a big part of my childhood. So I love the Big Ten. My 2 favorite conferences have always been the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. And I'm just really excited to see what happens in the crazy landscape of college football and in my career, my life. I'm here for the opportunity, and no job's too big, no job's too small. In fact, I just called a high school football game for Altitude Sports Radio, and it was Boulder High School versus Fairview. And it was 49-0 at half, and I learned about a running clock. I was at home in my bed, ready to go at 9 o'clock. It was beautiful.
I love it, man. Well, this conversation was beautiful. Thank you for the time on so many levels. We'll be having you back many times. Coach Mike Sanford, make sure you give him a follow on all the social media platforms. Coach, good luck, man. Thanks for staying in touch.
Thanks, Yogi.
It's the Afterglow. Jim Thornby, Yogi Roth. That was Mike Sanford talking all things Pac-12 with a little Bo Nix, a little, of course, Colorado. Jim, your takeaways from the former interim head coach at Colorado and our good friend.
Yeah, the 2 things. Number one, when he talked about authenticity with his coaching mentors, that always is a stickler. And then 2, when he talked about the impact of recruiting, we've talked about this off air before. I'm looking at the top 10 recruits in California that are for this upcoming signing class. A lot of them going to the SEC. I think 4 of them are going to Texas A&M. 2 of them are going to Alabama. One's going to Penn State. Like, this is not good news for the West Coast teams. Even though you're not all in the same conference anymore, you still got to build that wall around California and not let those players. That's part of the double-edged sword of this realignment. It's letting all these other schools now come into your high schools and take all this talent. So something to watch for come December.
Yeah, it's a really impressive point, because I don't know how many of those schools are going to Georgia and Florida and getting everybody, right? They're getting them to commit and then maybe getting leverage to get paid more or whatever it might be in that region of the country. I think it's something to keep an eye on. I'm really curious to see what the Pac-12 does with the next couple schools that it adds, in addition, the media partner. Because if you can do something unique, right, whether that is like the Big Ten where they're everywhere, or maybe like the Pac-12 could have gone to Apple, but something that is really attractive in recruiting, I think will be an element to swaying some of those 3-star players to signing at San Diego State, Boise State, and saying, you know what, yeah, there's something really unique here. Maybe stealing a couple other ones who want to play close to home. I'll say this, my other takeaway for Mike is that he is going to be a star in the media industry. I'm glad that we had him on this show. We'll have him on again. You can just tell when you're around certain people. He has that it factor, right? He said quarterbacks need toughness. I think broadcasters need to have an ability to tell the truth, but also be really likable. He has that in spades. So thank you again, Mike. Thank you to our founding partner, 76, for helping us out. Make sure you check out the Go, Go, Go Awards fueled by 76 at yoption.com. And thank you for all the support. Without the paid membership and the support from a lot of you, this isn't a thing. So thank you for that. The rest of the week, we got 5-star advice, another quarterback coming to yoption.com. We'll have another podcast in the back end, dive into SC Michigan and all the games coming up this weekend in college football through the lens of the West Coast. Peace.